Hi everyone, my name is Emel Kelly and I'll be talking about tribal issues and emergency management. So, who is considered a Native American and why does FEMA have a special section for tribal affairs? Tribal citizenship is determined by individual tribal governments. Usually, a person has either lineal descendancy or blood quantum is required. Federal recognition involves official acknowledgement by the U.S. of the political status of a tribe's government. This recognition makes tribes eligible for a number of unique federal programs. There are currently 562 federally recognized Indian tribes. Self-determination and self-governance is a policy that started in 1968. This gives the tribal governments the ability to control their own lives. This is an attempt to mend the broken relationship due to past policies by the federal government, such as policies of assimilation. The tribes are now sovereign within the U.S. and they can, for instance, regulate their lands, earn tax, and all of that. The government-to-government relationship was established in order to guarantee protection of the tribe status and to deal with issues that affect all. The Stafford Act authorizes the President to provide additional assistance to local, state, and tribal governments for disaster response and recovery activities. Two types of declarations are possible under the Stafford Act: emergency declarations and major disaster declarations. These give tribal governments three types of assistance: public assistance, which is typically reimbursement for work or damage which occurred as a direct result of a declared disaster incident; individual assistance, these are grants that provide supplemental assistance to individuals and households adversely affected by a major disaster or emergency; lastly, hazard mitigation grant program, which is available only under the major disaster declaration. These provide assistance to implement cost-effective hazard mitigation measures to reduce the risk of loss of life and property from future disasters. These are only granted during reconstruction of the previous disaster. The Sandy Recovery Improvement Act of 2013 amended the Stafford Act to include the option for tribal governments, in the person of the chief executive, to request a presidential emergency or major disaster declaration independent of the state. They can still obtain assistance under the state declaration, as was always the case. However, before submitting a presidential declaration, the tribal governments must meet certain requirements. The impact of the incident has to be consistent with those FEMA uses for the presidential declaration recommendations. Secondly, the federal government does not provide 100% of the funding. The tribe has to show that it can cover the rest of the expenses. Thirdly, a FEMA approved mitigation plan is required prior to receiving grants and assistance. Fourth, the tribe must abide by the grantee responsibilities of the federal law. And lastly, the tribe has to have necessary staff to partner with FEMA and deal with grants and implementation of the program. As you can see, once the tribal government determines its capabilities are overwhelmed, all available tribal resources are exhausted, and joint preliminary damage assessment is completed and reviewed, the chief executive may consider submitting a request for a Stafford Act declaration. It must be submitted through the FEMA regional administrator, which will evaluate and make recommendations to the president within 30 days of the incident. The President will then evaluate the request and determine whether Stafford Act assistance is warranted. The President has the sole authority to make a Stafford Act declaration. Once the declaration is made, FEMA will expeditiously notify the Chief Executive of the decision. If the President denies the request or denies part of the request, the tribal government may appeal the decision. The appeal should be submitted within 30 days of the date of the denial and should include additional information to support it. So now that I've defined who is considered a tribe member and how tribes are recognized, as well as explained how FEMA works with tribal governments, I will now elaborate on tribal issues and how they impact emergency management. As you all know from our readings, risk communication and perception is influenced by a person's psychological and demographic characteristics, for example, education, health, poverty, etc. So, the issues in the education system of the tribal population include dilapidated or behind curricula, funding, insufficient or inadequate staffing. If populations don't have the basic of education, then all the resources available to them will not help them. Poverty. Tribal peoples have disproportionately high level of poverty, high unemployment, and the reservations where they live are deteriorated. Some people do argue that the tribes are well off because of the casinos they own, but we have to take into account that less than 200 of the 562 tribes take part in casinos and get the benefits thereof. Healthcare. The statistics on Native Americans' health is troubling. They have higher rates of drug addiction and suicide, etc., combined with a broken health system and lack of access. Understaffing, lack of communication, and transportation are amongst the issues. Relationship with local and state governments and sovereignty. The states and local governments are not happy with the privileges granted to tribal populations because of their sovereign status. Most issues relate to money, of course. States complain that they provide infrastructure and certain services that benefit these populations while they don't contribute to the state. So they don't give money. Some of them demand money from the gambling. Enrollment. As I have previously explained, both the tribe and the federal government has to recognize a person as a member of a tribe. If both do not recognize the person, then the person does not qualify for federal assistance, such as the assistance I talked about, the individual assistance offered under the Stafford Act. Keep in mind that the FEMA does provide preparedness and consultation resources to address these issues, in addition to partnering with other organizations and establishing points of contact to better the support for the different tribes. For instance, FEMA has training for tribal representatives where they can take courses through the Emergency Management Institute. The Center for Domestic Preparedness also provides training on different disciplines, and all expenses are paid by the DHS. In order to strengthen the capacity of tribes, there are grant programs available. Other preparedness resources are available to the Ready Indian Country organization. Secondly, a detailed tribal consultation procedure has been established on August 2014 to maintain better relationship between FEMA and tribal governments. This way, both parties can engage in meaningful consultations and collaborate with each other. Partnership with U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Indian Affairs Department, and other such organizations are vital to knowledge on tribal peoples and to maintain relationships. Lastly, the FEMA tribe liaisons and tribal affair advisors are the point of contact between the agency and the tribal governments. Thank you.